Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We're very excited. Today is our first round in this webinar series. We did hold this very same webinar this morning, and we had a great turnout and wonderful presentations, and we are repeating it now at this time for the purposes of accommodating different time zones around the world. So a very warm welcome to everyone. And this webinar will be an introduction to the local and subnational government roadmap to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. As you can see on your screen, today's agenda, we have two presentations. The first is on the UN's post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and elements for stronger contributions of local and subnational governments, and that will be presented by Oliver Hillel from the Secretariat of the Convention of Biological Diversity. And the second presentation will be an overview of contributions by local and subnational government constituency between now and 2020. And that will be presented by Ingrid Kutsia, Senior Program Manager of ICLEI's CITES Biodiversity Center. My name is Timothy Blatch, and I'm also with ICLEI's CITES Biodiversity Center, and I will be facilitating today. So before we start and hand over to Oliver, a few things. This webinar is recorded, and we will make this recording available after the webinar, along with the supporting presentations. And secondly, we are hoping we are going to ask for some questions or have a section for questions and answers. We're asking that we do this after both presentations have been presented. And then you will be able to participate or ask questions in one of two ways. There's firstly the chat box on your right, where you are welcome to post a question in there. Otherwise, the alternative is to raise your hand. There's a function also on the right for you to raise your hand. So when we open the floor to questions, those are the two ways in which you can participate. So at this point, I'd just like to give a very warm welcome to Mr. Oliver Hillel. He is the Program Officer at the Secretariat on the Convention on Biological Diversity, or the SCBD. And I think without further ado, we can hand over to you, Oliver.
Thank you very much, Timothy, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good. So thank you very much for this introduction, and I'm very glad to be here sharing with you some of the perspectives on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and the process through which it will be developed. And I'm also going to make a few technical recommendations on some of the potential outcomes in the direction towards a stronger contribution of local and subnational governments in the post-2020 framework. I'm not sure. I'm trying. Yes. Okay. So first of all, I'd like to just remind the framework of the convention in itself. The current convention has a very innovative plan of action for the engagement of cities, subnational governments, and other local authorities. And this plan is in place until 2020. As you all know, there's been a number of activities such as summits. There is a global partnership for local and subnational action on biodiversity, and there are advisory committees for local and for subnational governments. There are many projects and activities that the Secretariat has engaged with, and particularly, I think, one very relevant element of the post-2020 framework that subnational and local governments could keep in mind is what we call mainstreaming, meaning the cooperation with the relevant economic sectors to achieve the three objectives of the convention. So here in this case, I'm going to concentrate, as I said, on the process for the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, because the current framework, which was adopted in 2010 in Nagoya, which is the strategic plan with 5 overall goals and so-called 20 Aichi biodiversity targets, will have reached its validity in 2020. So the parties in the 15th Conference of the Parties in Kunming, Yunnan Province in China, will in fact look towards the adoption of a new potentially 10-year plan from 2020 to 2030. So that the opportunity for the development of this plan is what we're discussing here. I'm not going to take too much time calling attention to the whole timeline of events that have been prepared for parties and subnational governments. This is widely available, but I'd like to call attention, for instance, the main meetings will be meetings of the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technical advice. There will be one Substa 23, which will happen at the mid of this year, and then we'll have more towards November, and then we'll have SBI 3, which will happen in May next year. And between those, what I think is important to note are some meetings that the open-ended working group on that is tasked with the development of the post-2020 biodiversity framework will have. One of them will happen in this year and one in the next, and the dates are available. Here you can see a deeper view of other political processes that may feed into this development, because as I said, this is a UN-wide framework. So there's an opportunity for several levels of participation from the UN bodies, going from general assemblies to G7 and G20 summits, to World Economic Forum meetings, and to other significant events in IUCN and others. So we expect that a whole range of opportunities will be given for the participation of local and subnational governments. Well, just before I go further, let me mention already that thanks to the leadership, among others, of ICLEI and the Network of Regional Governments for Sustainable Development, including the group of leading subnational governments for the Aichi biodiversity targets, have already contributed to several of the regional consultations that are going on for the development of the post-2020 framework, including the one that is coming up in Montevideo in May of this year. We're hoping to see a participation and a contribution. And I am also, as Secretariat, in touch with those networks to assure that the proposals and ambitions and view of subnational and local governments be considered in the process. I did want to call attention to the issue of mainstreaming, because basically local and subnational governments are natural allies to the parties as part and parcel of the national governments and contributors to this process. They have a privileged relation with the private sector and the productive sector. So one very important way that subnational and local governments can contribute is to guide parties on how exactly cooperation can happen between the parties and those sectors on the 9 sectors that are listed there, going from agriculture and fisheries to forestry and tourism and energy and mining infrastructure, the whole manufacturing and processing, and even health sectors, and we should consider the financial sector as well. So all of those are asked to cooperate with governments, and this, the local and subnational governments, as is proposed here, are natural mainstreamers, and therefore we invite the audience to this webinars to consider participating also through the mainstreaming avenue. We can also assure you that the convention has established an informal advisory group on mainstreaming to support the executive secretary of the convention and the bureau, which is a small executive group of parties, so that they can develop what we hope is a stronger strategic plan and elements and goals and measurable targets, including with an engagement mechanism so that subnational and local governments can make their own commitments and make their own goal setting and participating in the next iteration of the framework in a much deeper and more meaningful way. So there are many ways through which this informal group of mainstreaming can be an avenue, and I can assure you that in her constitution, the executive secretary has not yet published the result, but I can assure you that local and subnational governments are considered in the constitution of the advisory group, and I thank the networks that have applied in their candidacy. So there will be a way for this group to participate to the post-2020 framework through mainstreaming. And there will be moments, as are demonstrated in this slide, in which the subnational and local governments can contribute to the informal advisory group, and through the informal advisory group also to the meetings of the open-ended working group. And here I want to call attention, there is in September or October, there will be a first meeting of this open-ended working group, and in July of next year there will be another. So those are the two official opportunities for the mainstreaming and the post-2020 agendas to coincide. So my last substantive slide is a little bit of what I see from the technical standpoint, and that is important to define, that these slides are not a position of local and subnational governments. They are the technical perspectives of an officer in the Secretariat dealing with those themes on what could be elements for the common mission of a greater and more effective and more transformative role, I would say, of local and subnational governments in not only the post-2020 framework, but also its preparation process. So it's very important that all local and subnational governments engage in this process from now on. And I can tell you, I have heard from the host government of China that they plan to do that at the Chinese level as well. So there will be preparatory events for the engagement of every Chinese local and subnational government. That is what the Chinese government has assured us at least twice in this process. So we hope there will be a good process. And some of the messages that could be carried are listed on this slide. So we have already at the city level, we have a huge amount of experience now. There are a lot of best practices, and the local action on biodiversity project by ICLE, the current IKI Interact Bio project in 3 countries, and the perspective of the Sustainable Cities Impact Program of the 7th replenishment of the Global Environmental Facility. Those are all good perspectives because they do consider natural solutions for urban development, and they do consider how to make biodiversity an asset for sustainable urbanization. However, they need to be upscaled. So I think that's one of the things that technically we should see. We also have produced a lot of science. We have the Nature and the Urban Century assessment showing new results. I have just read the complementary scientific paper, which has also a bibliographical analysis of the reality that has just been circulated. There is a lot of new science that we should be looking at about the role and the contribution of local and subnational governments. Suffices to say that 16% of the impact on core biodiversity rich ecosystems from here to 2030 will be just by urban expansion. That's it. So 16% is directly from cities expansion, not to speak of all the indirect impact. So we need to prepare for that, and we need to make sure that that expansion follows the best practices that we all know. So also one important issue coming up is the issue of financing of the 2020 to 2030 framework. The fact is today, it is an accounting fact that the majority of funds dedicated to what could be called the biodiversity portfolio actually come from and through subnational and local governments. So there needs to be a better recognition of this fact. There needs to be more support to decentralized cooperation. And there needs to be the idea, the basic idea of the ecosystem principle, principle number 12, is basically saying that when you want to work with ecosystems, you need to find which is the level of governance that is most appropriate to deal with the ecosystem service that is being managed. And then resources and authority should be delegated at the lowest possible level of governance. This is principle 12. Every party has adopted that. So we need to make sure that this happens also from the financial point of view, and we need to make sure also that there is an understanding that that there is a big role to be played by local and subnational governments. There are possibilities. ICLEI has produced a manual and guidelines on vertical mainstreaming. Maybe we could improve on that. We could bring out more examples also on a very innovative tool that has been developed by UN Habitat, FAO, UNEP, and several others, including the Secretariat, which is a policy tool called the Guiding Principles for Urban-Rural Linkages. I invite this audience to look at this tool because it highlights that cities have landscape level and even national, if not global level impacts that should be considered. Those are the so-called teleconnections or urban-rural linkages. So obviously the footprint or handprint of food consumption and of the construction and design phase of urbanization, they go thousands of miles away from cities. So this is what this is about. We could populate these sets of principles with example. And of course, it is very important to consolidate the legacy of the first 10 years of the adoption of the plan of action so that it becomes a part and parcel. So in the past, the plan of action was kind of another decision. There was a decision that adopted the strategic plan and another decision that adopted the plan of action for local and subnational governments and other local authorities and cities. So we need a new strategic plan that doesn't have that as an afterthought, but does have it as a full and integral part. So I would say those are the main elements from a technical point that could be considered. But again, this is the perspective of the Secretariat. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you for that, Oliver. That was a great presentation. Our next presentation is going to be, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ingrid Coetzee, and she is from, as I said before, she's the Senior Program Manager of ICLEI's Cities Biodiversity Centre here in Cape Town, and she is going to provide an overview of local and subnational roadmap between now and COP15. And essentially the work that ICLEI and partners, G4SD, as well as Goals and others are doing in this space. So over to you, Ingrid.
Thank you very much, Tim, and thank you also to Oliver. So what I'm going to do, as Tim explained, is just to run everybody through what the local and subnational government roadmap is going to look like. But before I do that, I just quickly want to take a step back and just introduce ICLEI and specifically the Cities Biodiversity Centre, the CBC, for those people that are maybe not so familiar with the CBC. ICLEI was founded in 1990. And it's a world-leading association of over 1,750 cities, towns, metropolises, provinces, states, etc., that occur in more than 124 countries across the world. And we essentially are a driving force for global sustainable development. We have 5 key pathways which we focus on. And I'm very proud to say that one of them is specifically in relation to the area that is covered by the CBD. So we're talking about nature-based development. And then another thing which is very important is the global advocacy role that ICLEI fulfills, where we are the voice of our members, the cities, the other types of local government, the provinces, the states, the prefectures, etc., that are members of ICLEI. And essentially, we operate in the sphere of the multilateral environmental agreements, such as the UNFCCC, the CBD, the UNCCD, and we are an accredited observer to these 3 conventions. So the work that the CBC essentially does, we're based in Cape Town, and we are run by a dedicated team of skilled experts in the fields of biodiversity and urban development. And we offer a very wide range of services, tools, and guidelines. Oliver mentioned the one which you can see on the top right screen there, the guidelines, the vertical horizontal integration guidelines that deal with NBSAPs and subnational local biodiversity strategies and action plans. And we have a whole range of other tools as well that we have developed and offered to our members. And the work of the CBC, it's a global program. We are not, although we're based in Cape Town, South Africa, we are not restricted to geographically the continent of Africa. We work across the world. And we, for example, through our various projects, some of which Oliver has mentioned already, the lab, the Local Action for Biodiversity, which was a program that was run a few decades ago. It was a collaboration between ICLEI and the IUCN. We also have the Urban Natural Assets, the Rivers program. There's a coastal program, Interact Bio, and there's a whole range of other programs. The H2020 programs that are run through our European office, etc. Our global advocacy role is particularly important. As I said, this is also in the climate space. And we essentially seek to build international policy that strengthens the role of local and subnational governments. We participate in the UN-driven processes. We have special consultative status at the Economical and Social Council, and we are an organizing partner of the local authorities major group. And we also monitor very closely and engage with a range of Rio Convention processes to make sure that the voice of our constituency is heard. One of the ways in which we do this, and specific to the biodiversity space, is we have since, well, the past decade, 2008, we've organized global biodiversity summits of local and subnational governments, which are held as official parallel events to the CBD COPs. And we work in partnership with the Secretariat to the CBD, as well as our other partners that Tim has mentioned, NRG4SD, the group of leading subnational governments towards the IT biodiversity targets, which is the Goals Group, the Committee of Regions from Europe, etc. And the importance of these summits is that they unite subnational governments and local governments from around the world to provide a platform where they and the CBD parties can engage at the CBD COPs, and they also are also demonstrate the collective actions and innovations that come from the local and subnational government constituency towards contributing towards the implementation of CBD objectives and targets. And one of the things that we are very proud of, and I think that there's been a very, you can see it's also evident of the very close relationship between our constituency, ourselves, our partners, and the Secretariat of the CBD, is the fact that there has been a history of decisions that come out of the CBD COPs that recognize the role of local and subnational governments since 2008, which was based on the meeting of Cities and Biodiversity, which was held the previous year in Curitiba, Brazil. And every year at the COPs, since COP9, which was held in Bonn in Germany in 2008, we've been successful in both with the SCBD in getting decisions in with the parties around how the role of local governments is recognized and strengthened. there's some more. One of the other things that comes out of the COPs is also that there's always a statement or a declaration or a communique that comes at the end of the summit, which is adopted by the local and subnational constituency, and we then present this at the plenary to COP. And for example, in the last COP, COP 14, which was held in November last year in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, where there was also a communique, which we call the Sharm el-Sheikh communique. What was so exciting about this last COP is that there were so many decisions that came out of the COP that related to or recognized the role of local and subnational governments, including the whole point of mainstreaming of biodiversity, which Oliver has referred to in his presentation. The roadmap, just very briefly, this is an overview picture. It's a very dense roadmap. There's a lot of really exciting things that are going to be happening, and we're obviously not able to represent everything in this presentation. But what we've done here is to try and show you the ambit and the progression from COP14, from 2018, leading right up to COP15, which is going to be held in China. And we've tried to just highlight some of the key interventions and milestones on the way. The ones that are highlighted in mauve or light purple relate to the United Nations and the CBD related events, many of which, in fact, all of which is detailed in more in Oliver's presentation. And then the ones that are in green on the screen are the ones that come from the local and subnational government constituency. But as I said, please bear in mind, this is obviously just a sort of a snapshot of some of the events. So just to give you some more insight into the main elements of our roadmap and our strategy leading from now, or in fact, actually from 2018 towards, as we build up towards 2020, is that, as I said, we will consolidate the inputs and the contributions from our local and subnational constituency. We will work very closely with our partners, as well as the SCBD and the partners I've mentioned in the past, being NRG for SD, the European Committee of Regions, and the Goals Group. We're also intending to develop a position paper which sets out the ambitions of the local and subnational governments towards the post-2020 framework. We want to participate and contribute in very active ways to the action agenda for nature and people. We will hold and organize ICLEI events, and then obviously also there will be another Global Biodiversity Summit, the 7th summit at COP15. And then very importantly, and I will talk about this a little bit more, is that we've established on our Cities with Nature platform a reporting and engagement platform for cities and local and subnational governments to participate in the post-2020 process. The advocacy structure, just to highlight this all happens under the auspices of the Global Partnership for Biodiversity in Cities, and it consists of 2 committees or advisory committees, the one being for local and the other one being for subnational governments. The history of this is very interesting, actually. It started many years ago. It was sort of, in a sense, born out of the Local Action for Biodiversity initiative, and then it was expanded, and in the year 2010, 2011, formally recognized, and these advisory committees were formally instituted. And we have now, since last year, 2018, and this year, we are revitalizing these advisory committees so that we have a formal and coordinated structure, advocacy structure. Then another thing that we've done is we've developed a web page that is dedicated to the post-2020 process. At the moment, this web page is temporarily being housed on the CBC website for the reason that we are busy finalizing the sort of IT architecture and the software design to migrated across to the Cities with Nature platform where it belongs. And essentially what the web page does is it shows a timeline of events. It shows some information on the negotiations that are ongoing at the international platforms. It will give information on the summits. And then, as you can see, there's going to be a commitment page. Another thing that we are doing is this webinar series, of which today is the first, the introductory opening webinar. And the idea of these series of webinars is to keep our constituency informed of the consultations and negotiations that are ongoing, on what's happening at the action agenda level, the roadmap of local and subnational events, including not just the ICLEI ones, but also those of our partners, NRG for SD, Committee of Regions, Goals Group, and more. And we will be holding these on a monthly basis. Every time it will be in 2 time slots so that we can accommodate the different time zones. And we plan on having a range of different topics and themes that we will discuss, very closely related to some of the things that Oliver, for example, highlighted, issues like vertical integration, the mainstreaming, etc. We will also talk to the outputs, the outcomes that come from regional and other consultations, and give feedback, what's happening at the SAPSTAs, etc. The dates and the options of these different webinars are on the web page that I've just shown you, and you're also able to register from there. This is just an indication of the timeline of events. It's not an online slide, so I can't scroll down, but it just gives you an idea of what it looks like and what the interface looks like. And then we will also plan on giving a regular update via email, just news bits and the latest developments of what's coming out of the discussions at the global level and also the local and the subnational level, so that the constituency at local and subnational level can be kept abreast of the unfolding process and how the debates are developing and what the latest thinking is. This is the Cities with Nature platform, where we will be migrating our webpage to. And the idea is, as I said, one of the things that we are busy designing the IT architecture for at the moment is to have a commitment page, and we're working very closely with the SCBD on this. We are in the process of appointing IT software designers, and hope to have them appointed within the next couple of weeks so that we can do the programming and get the page activated as soon as possible. And the idea is that local and subnational governments can use that page to make their commitments, to share their commitments and their ambitions in terms of what they're going to be doing from now to 2020, but also in terms of the contribution that they would like to make and the ambition that they would like to see coming from the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And this, in summary, is just to try and give you an overview, sort of a nutshell or a snapshot picture of the whole process as it has evolved over the last years since 2008. So on the left hand, we've started looking at the process in terms of first the MDGs and then the SDGs. And then you can see where it starts, where the biodiversity process has started, first initially with the local action for biodiversity program that we talked about earlier, that started also around about that same time, and then has evolved into a more transformative, innovative tool, which we now call, or platform, which we call Cities with Nature, where cities from all over the world and subnationals, we have had districts and provinces that have also registered on this, where they can share with the rest of the world and they can connect with other cities and subnational governments around what they're doing to work with nature and to protect nature, etc. And it's on that platform that we will host the sort of local and subnational post-2020 web page and the commitment page. And then in the middle of the screen, you see the process around the CBD. So you first have your strategic plan for biodiversity, the 2011 to 2020, and the Nagoya Plan of Action that Oliver also referred to. And you see there the IT biodiversity targets. And then in the very above that red line, it's the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework that we are working towards and preparing for. And then on the very right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the links between the biodiversity summits and the COPs. Obviously, we haven't put them all in for presentation purposes, and those were the milestone ones. And that is the end of my presentation.
Great, thank you, Ingrid. That was a wonderful presentation. I think at this point we welcome any questions or points of discussion. So as I mentioned, there's two ways in which this can be done. The first is through the chat box or question box on the right. The second is by raising your hand, and we will allow you to speak or unmute you. So if there are any questions or points of clarity or anything, we will share now. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Ryan, who will facilitate the questions and answers. And yeah, so please feel free now to ask any questions or begin a discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks everybody for the presentations. So as Timothy already mentioned, there's two options. Either you raise your hand or use the questions or chat box functions. At this stage, I don't see any questions or raised hands. I'll just hold up this one raised hand.
Hi, thank you. Thanks. Thanks for this presentation. I think it's really useful to have this overview because there's so much happening at different levels that it is hard to keep track of that. So I think this is a great initiative to have these webinars. My question is a little bit to you, Oliver. Is there has been this talk of integrating the two narratives around climate and biodiversity, and it is challenging because some of the terminology is different, the level of progress is different, but I think it is extremely interesting that the climate summit that the UN Secretary General is organizing in September has nature-based solutions as one of the key areas that they want to focus on. So could you give us some more insights as to maybe from the Secretariat whether there are greater efforts in moving towards integrating with the whole climate dialogues as well, and trying to find, or at least trying to really identify and build on points of synergies between the two?
Yes, thank you for this question. There is, a very clear and broad strategy from stemming from all the way from the Executive Secretary to reinforce the links between the Rio Conventions and, of course, to bring ecosystem-based solutions very much to the agenda of the climate discussions and debate. This is becoming successful, as you said, mostly because many of the mechanisms that used to be looking exclusively at climate solutions now have realized the really scalar and logarithmic savings and economies of scale that can be done by putting ecosystems to the service of the climate goals. So there is a lot more than just adaptation through ecosystems. There is the whole development of new infrastructure using natural solutions and sponge solutions and adaptation in the very essence of infrastructure and energy and transportation. Now, I cannot give you now more precise information on specific steps because I would have to consult with my colleagues who deal with not only the connections with the climate conventions, which are happening, but also to the to, for instance, the Rio Conventions Pavilion and many other initiatives that are bringing together the Rio Conventions as well as the Biodiversity Liaison Group. So I would, in general, I can tell you that there's a very strong effort in this direction, but I will come back to this group with a specific response after consulting with my colleagues on climate change.
Can I just come in here? Thank you, Oliver. It's Ingrid, and I think that's really great, and I'm glad you mentioned it. It is certainly one of the topics that we would like to include in the webinar series going forward, because I mean, I think it's both you and Sunanan have mentioned it's a really important area, and finding those synergies and strengthening those synergies. So this is definitely something that we will raise in one of our future webinars, and Oliver, we will definitely be working very closely with yourself again in that connection.
As a side comment as well on this, Ingrid, and thanks for that, I just wanted to add that, for instance, this global trend towards a stronger conjunction of agendas is extremely alive in the work of subnational governments and cities in particular. So I would turn it around as well in the sense that it is up to the declarations and statements and the ambitions of local and subnational governments to call in a very strong way the attention of parties to the reality on the ground that subnational and local governments need to find synergies between the two agendas because they don't have as much ammunition not to do it. So ecosystem-based resilience is very much on the forefront, for instance, of states like California. And it is not a coincidence that we are in discussions with Governor Newsom and Secretary Crowfoot, who are also driving California's climate action leadership toward a bigger and stronger role for natural solutions and biodiversity. So this is part of a trend that I think subnational and local governments can even take a leadership role in bringing it into a stronger way into the agenda of the convention.
Thank you, and that's a point very well taken. Thanks, Oliver.
Thanks, Oliver. Thanks, everyone. Any other questions? The floor is yours, Nanda.
Thank you. Sorry, Oliver, just again, point to you. I just wanted to make sure I understood correctly that you did mention that the Chinese government, in principle, has agreed to go into a consultative process of including local and regional governments in China. Is that correct? And if so, is there any other further information that you may have in terms of how they might be planning on doing it?
Yes, well, the very facts speak for a positive trend in this direction. The executive secretary has met with the vice mayor of Kunming and the vice governor of Yunnan province as the official hosts at the local and subnational level for the conference. And it has been already determined that the entire conference will be run by 3 government agencies, namely the Ministry of Environmental Ecology, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the government of Yunnan province. So the governor of Yunnan province will play a major role not only in the convention, but there has been, and we should say that this is very much thanks to ICLEI's excellent work at the level of its Beijing office, that the Chinese focal points have signaled that there is good cooperation in this sense and that they feel very comfortable in delegating a stronger role to ICLEI, along with the Network of Regional Governments for Sustainable Development, as to assist the Chinese government as the host government to organize the 7th summit for cities and subnational governments. I can also share with you that in the last meeting of the subsidiary body in Montreal, and again, thanks to the network and ICLEI working together, we had a very good side event in which the focal point of China has clearly said that they would like to engage all subnational and local governments in preparatory processes towards a productive summit. Now, what we have not yet had is the nomination of focal points in the governments of the city of Kunming and the province of Yunnan. So we are waiting for that nomination to start the development. But meanwhile, I can informally share with this group that there is a perception on all sides that the Ministry of Environment and Ecology and the Secretariat have already separately met with ICLEI staff and leaders, and that this is progressing well. So I cannot tell you anything concrete yet in terms of the constitution of what we hope very soon will be a steering committee for the development of not only the summit, but a preparatory event, and even more a whole roadmap that can be developed for the development of an input into the post-2020, because let's remember that from the 1.2 billion people that will be urbanizing from here to 2030, about 300 million are in China alone. So there is a big need for China to take leadership, and there is also a willingness in this sense. So I am assured that the government of Yunnan will play an important role, and that the government of Yunnan is very much looking forward to explore. Both levels of government have already committed completely to the logistics of the conference and the summit. Now what we are defining with them is a more substantive agenda for the definition of programs and preparatory processes, which, by the way, and with your assistance, can involve other leading institutions such as Beijing, the municipality, which also acts as a subnational government in China. The authority of Beijing has also manifested an interest in contributing. And as well, it should be said that in the process to define the hosting of COP15, the city of Chengdu was also very much involved and continues to show its interest in contributing to the preparatory processes. So the perspectives are good, Sunandan, but we're waiting for the definition of focal points.
Right, thanks.
Okay, everyone. I think if there's no more questions at this point, we just want to thank everyone who attended. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for the discussions. Thank you for the presentations. And we look forward to welcoming you to the next webinar, which will be in May. And we will announce the topic very shortly. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to chatting again soon.